So we have some categories here, and we'll give some examples of each, and talk about the exciting stuff about them that comes to mind. I want to say that this is not a rigorously schematized set of categories, but I think
it's not in alphabetical order, is what he's saying.
Yeah, but I think these are helpful, and let's start with pure bitters, right? This is what I call plants where you taste them and they just taste bitter, and there's not like a hint of aromatics in there.
There's like
not
nothing else
some
going on.
pungency going on or a sour note or whatever else. They are just straight up bitter, very straightforward, very clear. And so for me, Centauri is my favorite. It was not the first herb I really worked with, but the first herb I studied as herbal school.
Yeah, it was your first herb of the month.
Herb of the month, yep.
Yeah.
And it made a huge impression on me, because that was the time when I was doing some initial work to repair my digestion and change my diet.
Boy.
Yeah, and I mean, I was powered on Triscuits and cheddar until I met Katja. And, anyway, so when I took a month and I drank a quart of Centauri tea every day.
All by itself, too. He really did it, y'all. If you've ever tried to drink an entire quart of Centauri, it is an experience, and he did it every day, the whole thing.
Take a little sip every now and then through the day. Don't give up. You'll get there. But it made a huge impact on my stomach, on my digestion, and then as a result on my mood, and a bunch of other things as well. So yeah. I feel really attached to that plant, and it's a favorite. And the other thing I like about it is that it's not threatened in the wild. And gentian root, especially yellow gentian and white gentian, those are quite seriously threatened in their natural environments. They're often cultivated as well, and if you're going to buy products made from these herbs, get them organically cultivated. Mm-hmm. Cultivated because they weren't wild harvested, organic because they were tracked, and you are sure they weren't wild harvested or grown in weird ways or whatever else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a couple of pure bitter plants. And by the way, there are others, but we're just giving a couple examples for each.
Yeah, category. I mean, we could toss blessed thistle into this group and stuff like that. But when we say pure bitter, I think also a thing to say here is that these are cold plants. Mm-hmm. And when you taste them, it tastes cold. Yeah. Even if it's warm.
It's really true.
You really feel there's something cold about it.
They have what we call a refrigerant effect, which is essentially to dial down the thermostat in your body, mm-hmm. And cool you off.
It's like how a cucumber is cooling even if it was at room temperature.
Yeah.
Or like a watermelon. And the thing is that when you eat watermelon or a cucumber, you might think that's happening because of the water aspect. Mm. But it's actually not. There, even if you dehydrated it, that would be very weird. It would still have that cooling aspect, and that is the same kind of thing. It's not exactly the same chemistry, right, that you are getting from these pure bitters.
If you work with pure bitters like that, that's the place where you need to be more cautious about the constitution of the person you recommend them to. You can have somebody and they have some indigestion and some bloating and so on, and you're like, all right, any bitter is going to just move stuff along in your GI tract, and that's going to be great. And if you give them these pure bitters, that will happen, right? The digestive issues will be relieved. But if they already had cold hands and feet, and they shivered a lot, and they always were wearing scarves, and that kind of thing, you could push them even colder. Mm-hmm. Or you could take a neutral body and make it cold, if they were to work with these plants in isolation, right? It's easy to formulate around this problem, right? It's easy to say, well, you're a cold person, I really want to give you Centauri, though, because of this, I want to get that stomachic effect, I want to build you an iron stomach, right? So I'm just going to mix your Centauri 50-50 with ginger. And that's the thing you're going to take before your meals and so on.
I think actually you're even a great example of that. Because at the time that you did Herb of the Month with Centauri, you had a lot of extra fluid just because of what you'd been eating. But if you were to do straight Centauri for a month now, that would be extremely, I don't think you would make it through the month.
Yeah.
Because in general, you do tend towards, well, Not 10 towards dry. You are solidly dry.
I've also really changed my workout habits because at that time I was doing kind of high intensity exercise every night.
Yeah.
Close
for
to bedtime.
hours. For hours and
close
hours
to
and
bedtime.
hours. Yeah.
And so I did have more heat in my makeup at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now my heat's a little more like spread out through the week.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So like at that time, so like even though
if I took it now, it would be like Centauri with fennel.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But and possibly a little ginger in there too. But yeah. So thinking about like even though Rin's constitution is dry and cold and always has been, at that time, a drying, cooling herb actually made sense because there was too much extra fluid from food sensitivities going on and a lot of extra heat because of really overtraining, actually. Yeah.
You could tell because I kept spraining my ankles.
So just recognizing that we don't always say, oh, that's a cold, dry person. We're never working with Centauri at all. Well, okay, we can formulate, but even sometimes a cold, dry person is out of their cold dryness, and so that might be appropriate.
That's that current state idea
Yeah.
that I can bring forward. Yeah, right. So those are bitters where you want to exemplify to somebody what does bitter taste like. Let me give you my blessed thistle.
All of the bitter.
You will know, right?
This is just a bottle of bitter. There's nothing else in here.
Yeah. But in contrast, I think it's worth talking about mild bitters. You know, talking about bitter plants that are not super intense.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, chamomile comes to mind first. That is a complex plant. It has a lot of aromatics to it, a touch of sweetness. But the amount of bitter in chamomile is mild, right?
But real. It's mild but real. It's not like, oh, I don't know. Like, there's only a tiny bit in here. No, there's a legitimate amount of bitter. It's just not super, super unpleasant or intense.
It's easier to taste in a tincture. And it's much easier to taste in a long infusion tea than a short infusion one, right? When people take a tea bag of chamomile and steep it 5 minutes, then they mainly get like a sweet, aromatic, floral kind of a beverage, right? When you take a lot of chamomile and brew it strong and brew it covered and let it steep for 30 or 40 minutes, then you taste it and the bitter is unmistakable, right? This is also much more effective for digestive or menstrual cramps or a lot of other things that we turn to chamomile.
Yeah, you really do need it that strong, yeah.
Yeah, right. But it is a really nice herb to introduce that bitterness to people. And you can do it gradually. You can be like, okay, today you're going to steep your chamomile tea for 7 minutes, and tomorrow or 2 days from now it's going to be 8 minutes, and you're going to gradually increase the amount of bitter you experience through chamomile infusions. Yeah. Sure. There's a couple other mild bitters I think worth mentioning, and I'm going to mention betony, Stachys officinalis, and also skullcap. And those two herbs are probably like holding hands in your mind, I hope, because they aren't they really nice relaxant nervines? Aren't they very good herbs for people who are like calm and anxious and have like a restless mind?
No, not calm.
Who?
They're anxious, but they're not calm.
They're not calm. Why did I? Okay.
You want them to be calm.
You want them to be
calm.
want
that for them.
Yeah. The betony was already working on me. Yeah. And we like to point out the bitter element in many of our most effective nervine plants. Mm-hmm. We like to draw that connection to that embodying, that presencing activity of bitters. Whether we phrase that as like taking you into the moment or bringing you out of your worries and your regrets and so on. Or
getting you out of your head and into your body.
Right. Parasympathetic activity again. Mm-hmm. Rest and digest activity again, right?
Grounding is another word you might say there. Like all of this is that like movement downward, and it's driven by that bitter aspect.
Yeah. So again, mild bitters can be really, really helpful. And especially if you think of it not as like a one-time solution, right? And that's how these herbs work best, right? Nervines, many categories of herbs work best when you take them consistently, right? But reaching through digestion into emotion, that's That's something that these plants can really do well. All right. And then there's aromatic bitters, and yeah, chamomile goes into this group. And aromatic is one of those like flavor/scent words that is very open-ended, right? And we could give every one of them more adjectives alongside.
Right. You could think of the word aromatic is completely agnostic. Like if it smells, it doesn't matter what it smells like. If you can smell it, it's aromatic. Mm-hmm. If it has also that flavor of smell, like you know, like if you're thinking about oregano, the flavor of oregano and the smell of you can't really divide them. But there are things like centaury, it doesn't really have a smell, but the flavor is super present, right? So like aromatic is anything that has that smell, and the smell is often also an integral part of the flavor itself.
Yeah. So aromatic bitters include chamomile, but also sage and citrus peels, coffee, cacao, right? With these, the thing to keep in mind is that while you're layering on the bitter effects and the aromatic effects, and these two go together really nicely, right? Because aromatic effects, if we just stay with the two kind of major systems we've been looking at today, digestive and nervous, aromatics also operate on both of those every single time you work with them, right? Generally, they're either like stimulating or releasing tension in the digestive system, and actually, same kind of thing in the nervous system, right? Stimulating and releasing tension, moving things around, stirring things up, releasing like barriers that are holding things stuck in place. It's very frequently the case that getting both the aromatic and the bitter influence together is really valuable, and these herbs let you do that in one shot. You don't really need to formulate to make it happen. Yeah, that's handy.
And like my brain is just sitting here, just popcorn. I don't know, listing off like, oh, but what about that one? What about that one? Like, yeah, there's many more herbs in these categories. We just want to have a couple here for you to like get the idea of the flavor, get the idea of the action.
Yeah. Kind of a subset of aromatic would be floral, right? And now I'm thinking about like rose and lavender especially, because these are ones where sometimes people make a cup of tea out of them and then they make a little frown. A little devastated face because they smelled it and it was rose, lavender, yes, and then they sip it and they're like, what happened? Why is this bitter?
It is so bitter.
What have I done?
What have I done?
Yeah.
And even, what did I do wrong? Like, somehow it was your fault? No, these plants are bitter. They're bitter. Mm-hmm. And then that's not bad.
No, I kind of like that actually with rose in particular. It's not the same thing as the thorns on the rose, but it's a different way of rose being like, I am not what your Hallmark cards have pretended I was. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I appreciate that quite a lot. Okay. Listen, some of the like most fundamental bitters in Western herbalism are the ones that are roots, and I myself anyway, think of these sometimes as the inulin plants, and that's a little reductive, and I apologize to the plants, right? But I'm talking about dandelion, burdock, chicory, yellow dock. The reason I get to it through inulin is because that's adding onto the bitter element in those herbs a very important set of digestive actions, right? Inulin, if you're not familiar, is a prebiotic fiber. It is the favorite food of some of your favorite gut flora, the ones that are best to you, the ones that help you the most, right? And so with these plants, dandelion, burdock, chicory, yellow dock, they have bitter that's doing all these digestive actions we've discussed so far today, and they add on this inulin element of feeding your friends, which is going to chase away your enemies, right? And this is a super critical thing whenever we're trying to adjust gut flora. You can't adjust gut flora just by taking probiotic capsules. It won't work. Even if it works while you're taking the course of them, it won't last.
It won't last.
Right?
Right.
They're transient. They move through you. In order to get them to stick, you've got to feed them. Right? It's like the birds coming through your yard. If you want them to hang around, you have to put food out, and you can't just do it once.
You gotta keep doing it.
You gotta do it every day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Two things here. We need to add elecampane to this list.
Thank you, because it's inula.
It's inula.
That's where the inulin came from, right?
Yeah, and but it is a much more complex flavor than the rest of the herbs listed there. Okay, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is that if you're like, oh, that's fantastic, then I'm just going to take this dandelion tincture that I bought, and it's like crystal clear and I can see through it, and I'm getting the bitter and I'm getting inulin, and this is going to be great. No, you're not. So just because dandelion has inulin in it doesn't mean that you are getting any of it unless you actually are getting it. So if you're taking a clarified tincture, there's no inulin in there. Inulin is cloudy and white and not soluble. So if you can't see it, it's not there. And even if you take it in a tincture, you're getting such a tiny amount of it.
Right.
So if you want the inulin, you need to eat the roots.
Yeah.
Like really eat them. Or put them like in the broth and then do not strain the broth. You got to eat that like gritty, powdery stuff at the bottom. And it's also not in the leaves. So if you're taking the leaves and you're like, ooh, not just kidney health, but also inulin, like it's in the roots.
Yeah.
So
if you make a decoction and it gets cloudy, or some people say milky, right? But I like cloudy better. Then that has inulin content, and that'll feed it to your system too. Yeah. But really, the best way is to eat them, and maybe burdoc's the easiest one because you can often find it in a grocery store.
Yeah, yeah,
and it's a little easier to chew than the others. Yeah, but
and it has a little milder flavor.
Yeah, I mean, there's food items that have a lot of inulin content. The sunchoke, or some people call it Jerusalem artichoke. That's a food item with a ton of inulin content to it. Yeah.
But you feel it too when you eat those. Like you feel the feeding frenzy in your guts.
Yeah. Thing about those is they don't have much bitter taste to them. You know, especially the ones that have been cultivated for longer,
yes, right?
And like we were saying before, and so they're not exactly the same as getting your dandelion decoctions or eating your burdock root snacks or things like that. Yeah, that's real. Okay.
Yeah, and just remember, inulin is a really good poster herb for that concept, because people often are like, oh, well, I took my this or I took my that and it's got this action. Well, it might have that action. In theory, it has that action, but it's not necessarily going to have that action in every extraction method, and it's not necessarily going to have that action in every location of the body. So you got to know that what you want from the plant is present in the way you are consuming the plant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also worth noting and emphasizing again that inulin is not the only thing in these plants, right? And when we take them as food, or when we take a decoction of them or things like that, then we're getting more than just the inulin. And I think that matters, especially because inulin is added as a ingredient to a lot of processed foods. And there have been some studies that have looked at processed foods or isolated inulin as some kind of a supplement having occasional negative effects on the system. And when we looked at those studies, we were like, okay, that's interesting, but it doesn't scare me away from dandelion, and it doesn't scare me away from burdock or things like that, because inulin as a hyper-processed food object ingredient is probably not equivalent to inulin as a constituent of the herbs we work with.
Right.
This is just a story we've seen turn out over and over again with a lot of different constituents in plants, so that's what we expect there.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of similar to carrageenan, you know, from like Irish moss and other seaweeds.
Yeah, some people have a lot of sensitivity to that, because you can't take something and isolate it and concentrate it and then put that isolated, concentrated thing into some food. It's not the same as the original thing that it was in. It's in such a high proportion that you would not normally be exposed to naturally.
Right.
So if you wanted to eat that much inulin as what they put into these snack foods or whatever, you would need to eat a whole pile of Jerusalem artichokes, and you would stop because you would be like, I'm really full of these things. I'm not going to eat any more of this. But you don't have that option when it's a snack food that's like, hey, we're high in fiber. We've got inulin.
Yeah.
And you're getting like a super unnatural quantity of inulin just so that they can write fiber on the label.
Yeah.
Or because inulin is trendy right now, and they can put that on the label. Yeah.
I think the biggest offenders here are situations where they're adding these ingredients, inulin or carrageenan or whatever, to liquids, you know, like as thickeners to like an alternative nut milk substance or something like that, or like a creamer. I think those are the ones where they tend to bother people the most.
Yeah.
And it's really just like, it's flooding you. There's not other like fiber and like solid matter to distribute it with, you know?
Right.
It's just
Yes.
like that. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. There's at least a couple of plants that whenever I think of them, I'm always right on that line between, really between like your liver and your nerves, or more broadly like digestion and emotion. And the two I'm thinking of here are yarrow and St. John's wort. And if you taste them side by side. They have a really similar degree of bitterness to them. In terms of your liver, they have a similar degree of activation, but the nice thing about yarrow is that it doesn't have that specific effect which St. John's wort has on those specific enzymes in the liver that are responsible for a lot of drug metabolism. So St. John's wort can interact, or better said, alter the way your body metabolizes a lot of pharmaceuticals, because it upregulates the production of a particular enzyme that does a lot of that work. And so because of that, there's many situations where someone is taking this drug or that drug or 6 drugs, and we don't want to give them any St. John's wort. But we do still want to give them a liver remedy. We do still want to give them a bitter herb. We do still want to give them, and this is where I especially come to yarrow, something that has that gut-brain intersection.
Yeah.
And I feel like yarrow is the best next choice when St. John's wort is off the table for that reason.
Yeah. I might also put chamomile in that category. I would prefer yarrow, but I might put chamomile for somebody who found yarrow too bitter, and they weren't able to do it. Because it doesn't matter how great an herb is if a person can't stomach it. Like if they can't handle the flavor of it, and they're just never going to take it, then it's not going to do anything for them. And so I don't want to say that chamomile is exactly like yarrow, but because both yarrow and St. John's wort are moving further down the bitter spectrum, and becoming more intensely bitter, I still find both of those quite pleasant, but I think that not every past me did. And so for the person, I think it's worth putting chamomile in that.
Yeah, and maybe not for everybody, but certainly for you, goldenrod can be here as well.
Yes.
Goldenrod for you is for when you've got too much water on the brain.
Yeah, which usually also is too much water in the trunk too.
But goldenrod and yarrow together, they have this quality of aromatic to them. Goldenrod leans a little more toward the floral side, but yarrow is in this group where I just can't get away from they're airy. They're the air
really
elements.
They really are.
In an aromatic terpenoid blend. Like it's...
And if you want to really push that, grow your own yarrow.
Yeah.
And harvest the flowers. When you purchase yarrow, it's mostly leaf and stem. There's like a little flower content in there, but it's mostly leaf and stem. You really want to push this, you get only flowers. And it is a totally different experience. And especially if you don't love the flavor of yarrow, I think if you try just the flowers, you will be really surprised, because then you get so much more of the aromatic aspect. You might be really surprised at how the flavor changes for you. And even like yarrow and goldenrod together. In fact, when we're done with this episode, that's the tea I'm making. Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Just those two, just the flowers. In both cases, just, like, you can work with the leaves, you can work with it. It's very effective. There is something amazing about the flowers of those two, blending them together. Like, just so good.
Yeah. A breath of clean air.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, well, if we want to go in a more earthy direction, there's some fungal bitters that are worth knowing and experimenting with. Reishi, in particular, is a very interesting flavor complex. It has an aromatic element to it, which is not the same as, but close to what's going on with coffee. Chaga is closer to coffee in that regard, and in the type of earth flavor it has.
Do you think so? I would go the other direction. I would say reishi is closer. I think that chaga is... Okay,
wait, here we go. Chaga is closer to coffee on the bitter earthy side. Reishi is closer to coffee on the aromatic side.
Maybe, but I think that chaga tastes better than coffee does.
Well.
And it tastes better than reishi does. Even though I have come to really appreciate the flavor of reishi, but still. And then, of course, we always just need to say, like, chaga is super trendy, and it's not sustainable. So please just recognize that nobody actually... I know all the marketing is telling you that chaga will solve everything and make you rich and happy and, like, all the whatever. Really, nobody needs chaga. Like, there's nothing that chaga could do for you that you could not get in other ways that are more sustainable.
We're worried about overharvesting. It's
been happening. It's been happening now for a long time. So if you can't get guaranteed sustainable chaga, then don't. Just don't. And so if you live in a more rural area...
You live in a birch forest.
Yeah, then one way to have it sustainably, it still isn't sustainable, but is make friends with all the loggers around, and because they will cut down trees and they know what chaga is. Don't let them use their chainsaw to take it off. Like, have a clean axe that you only, or a hatchet that you only use for this purpose, so that you know it's clean and it's not got like bar oil in it and all that kind of stuff, because you don't want that on the chaga. But in that case, that chaga was going to die anyway because they cut down the tree. Now, cutting down the trees is not necessarily sustainable. But okay, like, whatever. There's some complexity there. But regardless, it happened. And so that's the chaga to work with. But not all and not most chaga on the market is that kind of situation. So just... I feel like we just can't ever say the word chaga without saying you don't actually need it.
Yeah. But what is worth saying, though, about both reishi and chaga is that if you wanted a bitter and an adaptogen and an immunomodulator, well, you only need one herb.
Yeah.
Like, those are some powerful multifactorial categories of herbal activity, right? And here we have 3 of them layered into a single fungus. So no wonder it is, reishi, the mushroom of immortality.
Yes. And reishi, really, it's the one to go to because you can cultivate reishi. It's perfectly happy to do that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't like lose its awesomeness for that reason. But you can't cultivate chaga. So.
There's tons of debate about whether all Ganoderma species qualify to be referred to as reishi. I'm mostly in the camp that says they're not identical, but they're all within the same ballpark. And so if you have like Ganoderma applanatum or whatever where you live, go for it. Don't feel, oh, I'm getting third best reishi. It's great. It loves you, you should love it. So that's one way to influence immunity, right, is through immunomodulatory effects of fungi, like those friends. There's other ways to influence immunity, and sometimes they come in a bitter package, like when we get bone set, or calendula. Now, calendula isn't the most bitter one around. It's more clear in a good strong tincture, especially a high-proof tincture. I know you don't love them.
No, but with calendula, you do kind of need it. It's true. I hate a high-proof alcohol tincture. But calendula's got that resin, and in order to get the resin, you really do need to bump up the alcohol percentage. But I will say that, calendula is, if we're comparing calendula and boneset regarding the bitter, calendula is like 1/10 as bitter as boneset. Boneset is really
it's a strong bitter.
Astoundingly bitter.
Yeah.
But man, I just do not like the flavor of the way that calendula is bitter. It's just so unappealing to me, which, okay, you formulate around that. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's funny to me that the boneset is actually less offensive, even though,
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And listener, remember, you might feel differently, okay?
Yes. I think this is maybe unusual. I think this is one of those places where I'm extra weird.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But both boneset and calendula, we can call them immune stimulants. We can call them lymphatics because they do help to circulate that particular type of fluid in your body, and that's critically important for good immune function and surveillance and clearance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So super helpful there.
Hold on. Immune stimulants?
Boneset for sure. Calendula, stimulant is maybe not the right word, unless you allow your definition of stimulant to just include, like, we've improved efficiency.
I almost feel that way about boneset, though, too. Like,
yeah.
If I think about immune stimulant, I'm thinking more about, like, echinacea, although even there we have a little problem.
Mm.
But boneset, I think so much more about bone marrow and about immune cell production. Which, okay, that is stimulating because we are stimulating the production of more cells. But I don't think of that in exactly the same way as we usually think of something that we call an immune stimulant.
Which is often just reduced to, it makes more white blood cells happen.
Or, like, it makes more inflammatory process. Like, because actually even to say immune stimulant is so much more complicated than, like, or complex than what it sounds like. But when you say immune stimulant, then the next thing that you almost are thinking is, do I have to worry about a cytokine storm? And I don't, like, so I would never think about that with boneset.
I mean, most herbal immune stimulants aren't, like, monotonic. They're not only doing one thing in one direction forever.
Yeah.
So
it's I'm with you. It definitely is stimulating, but it is not the kind of stimulating that makes me say, oh, I have an autoimmune disorder, I can't work with that.
Yeah.
I think that's really what the little thread hair I wanted to split.
Yeah. An herb that's I guess it's got some touch to the calendula, but looking for a bitter, looking for one with immune relevance here, and I think of myrrh, because myrrh, it's a resinous flavor. It's different from other types of bitter tastes. Because the chemistry is different.
Yeah, because there's also heat inherent.
Yeah, that's true.
Just because of the resin. Mm-hmm. But there's heat inherent in Angelica. There's heat inherent in Calamus.
Yeah.
It's not like a disqualifier.
Right. And myrrh is, I think, interesting because you can taste the bitterness in it, but it's also not anybody's... it's not on anybody's list of bitter digestive herbs.
Well, it is not, like, it is famously, like, not so easy to get. I mean, okay, you can just order it at Mountain Rose Herbs, but it's...
special.
It's special, yeah.
Yeah. But good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got some bitters that will put you to sleep. And for me, that's wild lettuce and hops.
Many bitters will help you to sleep.
It's true.
Because of all the great things they can do, and some of them also have relaxing action, right? But most importantly, I guess, the most direct mechanism of action there would be shifting into that parasympathetic state.
Right.
Okay. That's not the same as wild lettuce and hops, which will make you sleep.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's a difference there. There's allow you to sleep versus command
put
you
you
to sleep.
Yeah. It's real, yeah.
Yeah.
So they have like some of their chemistry is so sedative to the nerves and to the brain that we put it in the category of being hypnotic, which is to say, even if you were well rested and in the middle of your day, you take a significant dose, a big enough dose of these, and you'll need a nap soon.
Feel tired, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Both cold.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think
Which
of a
goes right
hypnotic
along...
herb that isn't cold.
Yeah, I don't know. That'd be a tricky one, right? Because
I think they're...
the cold there is slowing down, sedating, turning down the dial of activity. And that includes alertness in this sense, not just like metabolic movement.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be the cold aspect there. Yeah.
Those ones too, we don't often take them as bitters, like straight up, because they could make you sleepy, and we want you to take your bitters with all of your meals. But sometimes you could say, all right, well, if you can handle having more than one bitter blend, you can have your daytime and your evening time. Yeah. You can take some hops and wild lettuce and some friends before dinner. Or if you're going to have a after dinner snack, then definitely get you some bitters with that too. Mm-hmm. These would make sense there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a couple of constituent-based categories I want to mention, and you probably won't be surprised that one of them is the berberine herbs. Right? We've touched on a couple of these as we go along, but remember, berberine and related, very similar bitter alkaloids are to be found in golden seal, gold thread, Oregon grape, yellow root, algarita, the emmer cork tree. There's others. I feel like I'm leaving somebody big out, but you can let me know later on.
Oh, barberry.
Yep, that's the one. Thank you for that. Yeah, barberry. Yeah. So the fact that they contain the berberine is partly, for some of them it's due to a family relation, right? A lot of them are in a similar plant family or a grouping like that, but not all of them. But the production of the berberine, the yellow color to the tissues that are most saturated with it, that particular flavor of berberine where it's not just bitter, to me it always comes across with a metallic tinge.
There's something super specific about that flavor.
Yeah.
It is the berberine flavor. Yeah. It is,
It's worth learning in your mouth, in your senses. And the way to do that is to get as many of these as you can and line them up next to each other. Taste your golden seal, taste your barberry, taste your Oregon grapefruit, and they are different from each other. They're not exactly the same flavor, but there's a consistency, and it's the berberine, and you can start to identify it and be able to recognize it in the future. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's worth noting there that golden seal and gold thread in this list are at risk or endangered, depending on what state you're in.
Yeah.
But barberry is really abundant.
Yeah, where we are, Japanese barberry is considered invasive. Mm-hmm.
It's like choose your berberine plants wisely. Mm-hmm. And depend on your other bitters. Berberine is so trendy right now, but it doesn't have to be berberine.
Yeah, I mean, remember that for the old school antimicrobial effects of berberine and its plants, and for the new round of blood sugar regulating effects, that for these plants themselves, it's never been only the berberine, right. And it's not that still when it comes to the blood sugar impacts. So, like we said before, choose your herbs for people based on the totality of that person and their needs and their symptoms or conditions or whatever. Not just on this herb has this chemistry in it, right? Yeah. Get broader than that. It'll be more helpful to everybody, really. Yeah. But they are cool plants. They are very potent and really good to have a blend. Remember, it's better to have a blend in a first aid kit or a go bag or something like that. Yep. And then kind of similar artemisinin containing plants, right? So we also mentioned these earlier, but that's mugwort, wormwood, sweet anise, and other Artemisia species contain artemisinin, gives them a bunch of their bitterness. Also, famously, very potent antimicrobial, including against the malaria. Right? The malaria.
The malaria. It rolls off the tongue.
Yep. Yeah. They are cooling in nature. They increase in their cooling nature with the potency of their artemisinin content. So mugwort's kind of moderate. Sweet anise a little more so, wormwood very powerful. in both regards. Yeah. Okay.
I'm pretty excited about the next 3.
Yeah.
I'm really waiting for them.
Yeah, this is right. This is because we get to energetics, right? So, like we said earlier, there's not universals with bitters because the plants are complex. They have many chemistries. They have mixed qualities, right? A lot of the time. But there is that tendency towards bitter plants to be like cooling, drying, tonifying, maybe more often than not. So let's look at the reverse of that. Let's look at relaxant bitters, right? Mm-hmm. And here, the motherwort and the vervain stand out to me as like my first thought. If I want a bitter plant, I want to relax somebody, those are the ones I'm going to be reaching for before my brain has fully processed what I'm doing.
For me, it's the vervain and the calamus. Those two are the two that pop right to my head. Yeah. Motherwort is an amazing plant, but I work with that in pretty specific ways, and blue vervain and calamus a little bit more broadly. Mm-hmm. But also that, like, these are certainly not the only ones we could put in this category, but...
Yeah. I mean, even chamomile, betony, skullcap, those have relaxing aspects to them.
Yeah, passion flower could fit in there. California poppy could... Sure. Yeah, I mean, it will go a little further towards sedative, but that's fine. Mm-hmm. But the thing here is that when you say the word relaxant, that might get you in a little bit of a pickle. Because calamus also has stimulating action. Motherwort has some stimulating action too. And so you might be like, oh, that I don't know if I can put those. Like, how can those both exist? They can. But it might be helpful also to think in terms of antispasmodic. Sometimes I I find the word relaxant to seem a little passive when I think about it. And so that's not necessarily bad. I'm trying to think of an herb that I think of as relaxant. Just relaxant. And not like lavender would fall in that category to me. Relaxant, but not really antispasmodic. And I feel like that antispasmodic part is really important. Because, especially when we're thinking about motherwort, blue vervain, and calamus, but also chamomile would fit here, also betony, but that's a little bit more metaphorical, is that it's relaxing specifically something that is spasming, something that is over-tightening, or that is white-knuckling, or that is stuck in this like threat space. And to say, oh, it relaxes you out of fight or flight, well, that's not inaccurate. But it doesn't feel as active to me as these plants actually are. I feel, relaxant feels like it's pleasant. Antispasmodic feels like it's doing the work. And that might not be true for everybody, but that's how it feels to me. That like relaxant is like, might be nice to have a little Damiana, relax a little bit. But like calamus is like, I'm kind of freaking out. I can't, like nothing's working right in my body. I feel nauseous and hungry. I don't even know. I can't think about one thing at the same time. I can't stop worrying about stuff that I can't control. Whatever. That's when I'm like, I need some calamus right now. I need some blue vervain right now. Or like, I'm having a little bit of a panic attack. It's time for some motherwort. Like I feel like it's the word relaxant is accurate, but it doesn't have the power behind it in our cultural use of the word that I want it to have to describe these plants.
You could say that these herbs are, they're not, their bitterness isn't mixed up with some astringent elements or some tonifying elements, right? Like they're devoting that activity of releasing tension without it being kind of blended, with something else that's squeezing or tightening or doing things like this. But it's
not mitigated.
Yeah. That's what. So those are very helpful friends, and I mean, honestly, if we think about what plants we find ourselves recommending or suggesting people experiment with most often, the bitter relaxant mints, they're up there.
Mm-hmm.
They're very, very helpful for modern humans.
Yeah.
With all of our stresses and anxieties and tension-inducing habits and so on. Yeah. So good friends to learn. We also find it super helpful for people to learn warming bitters and to be able to offer warming bitters and share them with our friends and clients. Because remember, like, the classic idea of bitter includes that coldness, which is both anti-inflammatory effects, but also with a pure bitter, it's just that direct refrigerant quality that the plant can have.
But some people's digestion is already so sluggish and so cold that they can't handle extra cold. Too much cold. They're already So in order to fix the digestive issues, yes, they need some bitter aspects because they're lacking that, but they're also lacking the warming influences in their life of like movement and like activity in different climate, like different temperatures and like our indoor and sedentary monoculture, which not some people have more active jobs or whatever, but like most people are indoor and sedentary most of the time, and so here it is. These problems are due to a lack of the bitters, but also the lack of all the things that you're lacking when you are indoors and sedentary most of the time. Yeah. And so you need some fire to get in there because you're not getting that otherwise.
Yeah, not getting those exposures, right? So warming bitters: calamus, angelica, elecampane, and don't forget turmeric, which I often do when I'm thinking of warming bitters for some reason. Yeah. Calamus, angelica, they come right together. Oh yeah, elecampane, but yeah, turmeric, don't forget. And that's a good way to differentiate turmeric from ginger, by the way. They're in the same family, they're very closely related, they share a lot of chemistry, but by impression, by our senses, there's a big difference between turmeric and ginger, and it's that bitter element that makes turmeric more drying than ginger. It makes turmeric, I consider it tonifying, whereas I think of ginger as relaxing.
I think that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a significant difference between them, and the flavor is an indicator for that going on. Yeah. The warming bitters are nice because, they're already formulated, right? It's bitter with pungency. And so, like we said before, if you have, centauri and ginger, that's kind of similar to what calamus is, but calamus is its own thing, right? Angelica is its own thing. And you might think of these and be like, all right, I have warming bitter, and then I say, all right, I really need an extra brain affinity, calamus. I need extra pelvic affinity, angelica. I need extra digestive affinity, elecampane. Okay. Or turmeric, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the way we get from, the cloud of every possible herb to this is the one I want to hand you. Yeah. Right. All right, and then last but by no means least, moistening bitters. Yes, they do exist.
They do exist.
Right. Like I said before, the bitter influence has that drying effect because of the movement and the draining of fluids, but some plants can be bitter and also demulcent at the same time. It's allowed because it's nature, it's biology. Everything that can occur will.
Yes. Including squares. Yep. Squares exist in nature.
Yeah. So evening primrose is a mild bitter, but it's there. It's a really interesting flavor, especially fresh off the plant. You chew a leaf, you get some pungency, you get some bitterness, you get some demulcent slime going on. One of my personal favorites, because those three energetic qualities track with my needs really nicely. Yeah. I could just drink evening primrose tea all day, and that would probably, suit me just fine. Yeah. So I really love that one, and it has some excellent nervine qualities to it as well, which you might expect based on that description.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Iceland moss.
Not a moss.
Yeah.
It's a lichen, right?
Yeah.
It's weird too, though, because it's weird in many ways. It's weird as a lichen that has demulcent qualities. That's not normal, right? You don't get that with
not typical.
with usnea. No way.
No, that's like about as drying as you can be.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, Iceland moss, not delicious. Definitely not delicious, but super effective.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if you put enough ginger in there, anything is delicious.
Yeah.
Cinnamon, you know.
We had that one time somebody made like an Iceland moss pudding gruel thing with like cinnamon and raisins and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Tolerable.
It was okay. Yeah. Little honey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, again, these are just some categories that we listed out today when we sat down to write up the plan for this.
It's definitive, it is not exhaustive.
Yeah. And we want you to be thinking like, oh, I could add this one to that category. Oh, here's another category of bitters for me to put into my schema of the world. Because that's what you need in order to pick things and be specific and be targeted to the needs.